Bon dia a tothom. Buenos días a todos y a todas. Good morning, everyone. En primer lugar,
Let me introduce myself. I'm Eva Garcia Chueca. I belong to the Advisory Council of the Barcelona Time Use Week, and I am currently the assistant to the Ombudsman of Barcelona. We will resume the morning session, and we will discuss a notion that has gained traction internationally, which is the 15-minute city. It's a proposal that aims to make a clear contribution to the promotion of time use policies, fairer and healthier time use. And it can have a huge impact on sustainability. And to discuss these topics, 15-minute city, time use policies and sustainability, well, we have structured the session in 3 different parts. We had to have Laura Perez with us, who is the Vice Mayor in charge of social rights at the Barcelona City Council, but she unfortunately could not make it last minute, so she will not be here with us. And let me briefly, therefore, explain you what we have planned for this session. We will first talk about the connection between time use policies and sustainability. And I have 2 guest speakers with me, Yayo Herrero and Charo Moran. They are both members of the Garua cooperative, and they will talk about their last joint publication. You have it at the back of the room. It's this dossier, this booklet here, entitled Time for Life, context-based reflection about the sustainable city. This is the issue 17 of a collection entitled Time Dossiers, that is published and coordinated by the Barcelona City Council. After them, we will open up the floor to the audience, and then we will hear from Hadrian Comenges from Mobiliscope. Mobiliscope is a geo-viewing tool that allows you to quantify mobility data in several cities in the world, in France and in Canada, and several Latin American cities. And with Hadrian, we will try to analyze how important it is to gather objective and quantifiable data to inform time use policies. But this will be the second part of the session. Hadrian will be connected online. And finally, the third part of this session will allow us to get to know better different experiences of different municipalities that have tried to implement time use policies connected to urban mobility. And we'll do that with 3 international guest speakers. Some of them are familiar faces. They took part in the previous session. Natalia Fidel, councillor at the city of Buenos Aires, Diana Parra, Sub-Secretary of Care Work and Equality Policies in Bogota, and Noemi Alfi from the City Council of Bolzano. And we will have a local guest speaker, Mariona Cunil, engineer at the Barcelona metropolitan area. So that's the plan for this session, and without further ado, I hand it over to Yayo and Charo to discuss this publication that I encourage you to grab on your way out. You have the floor. Good morning everyone. We would like to thank the Barcelona City Council for the invitation to take part in this dossier. We have really enjoyed it, and we have learned a lot too. We are here to briefly present the theoretical and analytical framework of the publication, and then some of the work streams. You have the dossier at the back, and you can have it if you want to. And of course, if we open up discussions, well, we can give them continuity over time, and this will be wonderful. The starting point was our work with Georgina and Sonia, and it was a starting point that focused on the idea that we are living through challenging times. There's a conflict between capital and life. Our economies or economic models that are based on constant growth of absolutely everything, extraction, the so-called production, and also waste generation, that clashes head-on with the biophysical constraints and boundaries of the planet, but also with the limited times and the vulnerable and lives in need that we have as human beings and as species. There's a chapter that focuses on the dynamics that we have seen in recent decades, very intensely so in the last 2 centuries, but focusing on the recent decades. Firstly, what we have come to call the Great Acceleration. If you compare extraction and fossil fuel consumption or mineral extractivism and the increase of work time and the distance that people have to commute in their daily life and the difficulty to meet basic daily needs, well, we realize that there is a strong correlation among all of those processes. So what we have come to call progress in a hegemonic manner has been built on an increase of population, consumption, and the extraction of resources that are not endless, and on an intensification of time devoted to underpin and sustain life on a daily basis. That situation has a bias that has to be approached in a cross-cutting manner, but it has a very strong gender bias. We have societies in which basically women are hungry for time. They have to take care of the different dimensions of life. I'm talking about productive and also reproductive work, which means to take care of the physical and non-physical conditions that must be met for human life to take place, to occur from a material standpoint and without precariousness. The conditions in which work is conducted, what we call work, which is mainly employment, and very often we do not include in that category work all the tasks that must be implemented to sustain life or existence. And the way in which these work dynamics take place or play out in industrialized societies, that is becoming increasingly precarious. And that inequality has a significant territorial bias. If we analyze the relation between the global north and the global south, well, we see that the extraction speed has a harsher impact on the countries of the global south and territories that are being used systematically as sacrifice areas for the benefit of privileged regions of the world that are ruled by the economic powers, political powers, and also the military powers, and regions that have totally hectic lifestyles, and they waste these resources and time. And along these way, many people lag behind. So we could analyze that situation from a class perspective, gender perspective, background perspective. It's very different for migrants than for non-migrants, or age perspective. It's very different to be of old age or not. So that is full of inequalities, violences, and dominations that we need to tackle. We say that the time dimension of this crisis is of paramount importance. We have very frequently analyzed the territorial dimension, the one that has an impact on territories, but the other dimension, the one that impacts human life, which is time, is constantly there in that conflict between capital and life, and very intensely so. to try and conduct this analysis, what we've done is to try and explain to what extent time is present, or time use, biologically, environmentally and socially, how that is present in that conflict between capital and life. And then we have tried to come up with an alternative paradigm to make a transformation proposal. And we have called it the paradigm of life sustainability. Well, it's not the name that we have coined, it's a paradigm that is already existing, and it comes from the decolonial and community-based feminisms, and also political environmentalism and feminist economy. That's where we come from. So what's that paradigm of life sustainability about? Well, basically, human life is radically codependent because it belongs to a mesh without which it cannot exist. It has to use material, energy, food, water, all the elements that are needed to sustain existence, and the recognition of the interdependency, to recognize that we are beings whose lives take place in our bodies that have needs that have to be met, and the recognition that an independent life, a fully autonomous life, is an actual fantasy. So, in our opinion, the essence of the patriarchal being is to feed that kind of individualistic fantasy. That means that the lives of specific human beings are independent and autonomous, but that's only possible because in invisible territories there are plants, organisms, natural cycles, and a lot of hard work that is being done basically by women, and mainly by community-based women. Well, that's indispensable for that life to be sustained. When we recognize ourselves as an eco-dependent beings that are subject to the natural cycles of the earth, and if we recognize ourselves as independent beings, that is not doable at all. It's not feasible, and we cannot take care of the needs of the community. The fact is that we need to recognize that all born lives are not taken for granted. They are just a possibility. What makes a potential life to become a fully lived life is that those networks that interact with the goods of the earth and also with the peoples of the earth, well, they adjust to the paces, the speeds, and the timings for life to be sustainable. And that's why we mentioned the notion of times for life. And we need to acknowledge that this hegemonic social and mainstream organization today is not adapted to the needed times to sustain lives, and not any kind of life, but dignified lives, lives that can be fully lived. And the paradigm of life sustainability, therefore, the only thing that it proposes is that we need policies, cultures, and economies, that's what we say, that are centered and focused on life, put life at the center. And by putting life at the center, we mean societies that put at the center meeting the needs of everyone, and being aware that we live in a planet that has exceeded its boundaries with a climate change, that part of our minerals and resources are already up, and we will have to learn to live with less extracted resources, and therefore the redistribution and allocation of times to live a life become a key element of justice. Because otherwise, if we do not have time use policies, well, those people who historically have sustained life will be overburdened when it comes to doing that task. And I'm referring to women, of course. But this is no female work. Of course, there needs to be a co-responsibility by all citizens and institutions. And of course, this will not only be done by women, and that's why we need to rethink public policies and daily policies from this life sustainability lens. Well, Yayo has mentioned the theoretical framework that we have used to organize our guide, our dossier, and the proposals that we And I'll mention here the work streams that we have taken into account, always from this perspective of life sustainability. So we have three main thematic blocks. One is urban metabolism, everything that is needed by a city for the city to work. So cities of today are characterized by an increased demand of resources. Very often we're talking about long distances. We have this global paradigm, and they generate much more waste and emissions than in any other place. So we need to reduce the material side of cities. We need to put life sustainability at the center, because this will mean that they will be more adjusted and adapted to the environmental sustainability. The second block has to do with city structure and governance. Urban planning, for example, or the way a city is structured, transportation is organized, these all has to do with the times of life. When you live in a big city, you spend a lot of time commuting. Care work is very difficult when your mother lives the other side of town, etc. And the last block that we have included is what we call time for life and new notions, new possibilities, new scenarios. We need to make this transition towards new ways of observing reality. And we need to rethink the way we've come so far. We need to agree on a diagnosis, and we have to generate new potential scenarios. And that's the third block that we have included. So very briefly, so that we can have some time for the others. In terms of the urban metabolism, we have included four aspects. The time dimension of the energy-climate binomial. These are two sides of the same coin. The energy model is linked to the energy or climate crisis in which we are living, and it has a lot to do with time, because fossil fuels were underground for centuries, and in 300 years we will burn them all. Well, not all of them, because many of them are not accessible, but they have been released to the atmosphere, and this is a temporary clash, a huge clash. Therefore, we need to make this transition towards an energy model that is based on renewables, and we need to reduce energy demand globally, especially in cities. There are many impoverished municipalities with very low energy consumption. There are areas in this planet that are not electrified. So this degrowth has to be asymmetrical, always from the lens of social justice. And we know that very often women are the ones that face the most problems when it comes to energy poverty indicators, because their daily rhythms and their way of organizing their daily lives means that they have more precarious jobs, and it is all connected after all. And we talk about energy sovereignty. What does it mean, and how to challenge the energy model and make that transition? Or we criticize renewable energies because they are based on minerals too. We will not give you detailed information about all the proposals, but we propose to conduct an energy audit to look into time, energy, and gender, so that the policies proposed by municipalities are adjusted and adapted to this new paradigm of life sustainability. Another aspect has to do with water rhythms. Water is an indispensable element for life, as we all know, and it seems to be a renewable resource, but the increasing consumption rates and consumption speed means that the water cycle has been distorted. And in most cities, there are direct and indirect consumption, and only 30% of drinking water, which is scarce in the planet, is used directly. But most water is spilled, is lost, not only in the distribution system, but also rainfall in cities, where there is these concrete insulation, which means that rainfall is lost to the sewage. So as for the proposals, we would like to support the water cycle of cities and adjust it to the international water cycles and try to recover that lost water. And of course, if we combine wastewater with rainfall, this will have to go through a water treatment plant. Another key element in a city is food and food production, the food production that reaches the city. We know that being in a hurry goes against a healthy nutrition or diet. If you have the time to go to the market to buy fresh fruit and veg and cook it at home, well, that is directly connected with a healthy diet. And we know that in this context, women are hungrier for time. And very often we just grab a snack around a corner because in our daily adventure, well, we don't find the time, that fundamental time to feed ourselves. But we also know that the agribusiness is characterized by using too much fertilizers and pesticides in their crops to increase the productivity of specific crops in the minimum time possible. We have to go back to the slow times of life, to agroecology, which is a different way of producing food and taking into account proximity. There are many urban initiatives. Barcelona takes part in those, such as the Milano Agreement or the Network of Municipalities for Agroecology. These are municipalities that are thinking about having a healthy food supply and at a bioregional scale, so promoting the bond between the rural areas and cities. And finally, cities are characterized by their waste generation capacity. We're talking about GHGs, solid waste and liquid waste. So these three R's that we mentioned, the two R's, reuse and reduce, we always forget about them. Well, we need public policies to focus on those. And that's what we are missing the most. If you ask citizens, what do you do for the environment? They always respond, well, I recycle. And they stop it at that. But we should take into account a prevention approach to waste generation. And we need a truly circular economy that is adapted to the slow cycles of nature. Well, we have proposed a series of initiatives and, for example, the recycling facilities should really recover and re-give, because basically we do the selection of waste and all resources are lost there. And to try and overcome the obsolescence of things. The second block focuses on structure and governance. And we have, well, as in the dossier itself, the starting point here was to put together the environmental sustainability agenda, the justice agenda, the time agenda, and the feminist agenda. And for that, we have used a proposal that is being increasingly used in cities, and it's been adopted by the city of Barcelona. It's Key Wreathwood's proposal. There's an environmental boundary that cannot be exceeded, and there are a series of needs that must be met for all citizens. And between the ceiling and the bottom, we can come up with safe spaces for all citizens. And in terms of structure and governance, we have focused on urban planning and mobility because these are key. In the city, we need to rethink our town planning and the transportation designs. Those are key because transportation takes the lion's share of fossil fuel consumption and also GHG emissions. So all the proposals that we have made go along the lines of proximity, the diversity of people living in the city and the different ways in which they commute and inhabit the city. Proposals for local shops. We want to promote proximity shops because it's very important to manufacture, quote unquote, proximity. It's a key element for time use and the use of resources. We need to promote proximity. So in times in which immediate consumption and purchase through platforms that bring products from afar, well, that's key. And then we have focused on nature-based solutions, which means that when you become an ally of nature in the city, well, there are many things that become easier. And also community-based solutions. We believe that it's indispensable for public policies to include the community as the key factor to implement a different town planning and mobility. Secondly, we have made proposals that are based on, and this is Eric Lindenberg's book title, Palaces of the People. He calls Palaces of the People all organizations, venues such as libraries, sports centers, elderly homes, day centers, primary care centers, hospitals. These are key community spaces in cities. These are spaces in which the community can be built, where people meet. And on top of that, there is the coexistence of people to solve needs. And for example, we have reinforced something that has been started by the city of Barcelona, which is to promote a network of climate shelters. Obviously, there are no minerals or energy available for everyone to have an AC machine at home, but we can have collective spaces in which cold waves and heat waves can be weathered with a more collective approach, taking care of the common goods. The third element that we have focused on in this part of structure and governance has to do with the transformation of trade models, as I said before. And finally, we have insisted on health, environmental health. We need to understand that the health of ecosystems goes hand in hand with public health and people's health. The biological clock, together with the social clock and the environmental or the ecosystems clock, they have to be in sync. Therefore, we need to take actions in the three domains. Very shyly so, but we have taken into consideration some elements that are connected with chrono disruption. Diego mentioned yesterday some work streams in his presentation that open up new possibilities to reflect. And if you look at it from his perspective, well, it includes a new approach of times for life. And from that, we have developed several proposals. And we wrap it up with the third block, which is times for life and new scenarios. And we tried to basically look at the reality through a different lens. And some of the things that we have learned along the way will be okay and feasible, but some others will not. So generally speaking, we believe that citizens have information about the crisis situation in which we live, but sometimes that is not approached from an emotional standpoint or the lens of potential scenarios. And that's why we have included this conceptual framework of life sustainability. And we propose 3 work streams in this category. One has to do with new narratives and cultural production. So we will depart from the dystopian cultural framework. It's doomsday, but we will rather be approaching reality from a utopian standpoint to try and develop a roadmap.
Well, we have a whole bunch of ideas and proposals which come from those narratives, which are distinct and different and far more empowering, which will bear in mind what was being said of the feminist economy, of the ecofeminisms, and many disciplines to work jointly with these new narratives. I'm talking proposals such as local museums to explore these imaginary spaces, or other areas to help start up. But all the tools we have with these new imaginary situations, and transmit the idea of desirable and potentially possible futures in the frame of a good life and enough time to live life to the full. And then the second subject we had was to link times for the city with cyclical times of nature. All these processes which are carrying out in many cities to slow down the cities, but also re-naturing cities, re-greening cities, where there are many intervention spaces from the tree holes or balconies, terraces, walls, rooftops, and also sort of, if you like, empty lots as well, to make us go back to the idea that we are part of nature as residents of a neighborhood, and that there should be stable structures, but there are also spaces for care, spaces for socialization, spaces where we feel far more at ease and where we can combat pathologies of these negative lifestyles. There are many initiatives to nature and regreen rivers. Rivers go through the city, almost hidden. They're grey and seem polluted. We don't enjoy them, but very often we should stop aggressing coastlines or rivers or urban forests, and life comes back. And we can see how we can work on that idea. And lastly, we also wish to talk about the necessary learning process for a resilient future, a future which bears in mind all these aspects. And we work from the idea of eco-social competition. Not only does that have to be limited to formal education system, but to the whole citizenship. And the spaces where we can meet up. Barcelona has a neighborhood plan, or a series of civic centers, which are areas of eco-social knowledge. This, quite apart from knowing, knowledge is necessary to learn, and which has to be put in the center. We should also know how to do things, set up initiative, experiences, collective alternatives, which will be sufficient to imagine other ways of being in the world. And one way of looking at city, a more different attitude towards life, in the sense that we internalize these eco-social competencies, in the sense that they are win-win tools which will give us better lives. We will be able to flee from these eco-tiredness, and we will fall into that because, in a sense, we work them as a collective, and we want this to make it worthwhile. The trajectory is worthwhile in itself, whether or not we have achieved all our targets. Barcelona, in this sense, is also the vanguard of many issues, and all the eco-social competition is also fed in with what to do and how to do from municipalities proposing school canteens, also climate refuges within these schools where all the neighborhood can meet, or the school revolt, which appears in Spain, calling for safe spaces for children in vis-a-vis schools. Everything which has to do with bioclimatic rehabilitation, which involves two matters. We should be adapted to climate change, is here to stay, and also how to decarbonize all our lives now to mitigate effects of climate change. Well, that would be the last block. And to conclude, we have thought that this subject of empowering time is very attractive and is a pretty powerful element to work on it, and also with a hope and decision.
Muchas gracias, Yayo y Charo.
Thank you, Yaya and Charo. I think your presentation has been fascinating, and we're going to rush to read this dossier. Congratulations for your work, and also congratulations to the City Council for fostering these kind of initiatives and being in the vanguard of these changes. Let us open up a very brief Q&A. In any case, if there are more at the end of the session, we shall continue, but allow me to recover some of your suggestive ideas. You talked of this conflict between capital and life, conflict which starts from this material extractive approach which dominates our life, this hegemonic idea of progress and a linear time, when there are different times in life, the need for an intersectional glance and bearing aware of these territorial differences between the North and the South. This proposal you launch of a paradigm of sustainability of life, which moves from a feminist view and a decolonial approach, and moving away from the fantasy a fantasy of dependence, and life is full of dependencies, of interdependence, and allows this transition between possible lives and true lives, and if like realistic lives, and the need to move forward to a greater energy sovereignty, and this proposal of an urban metabolism, and that we can become aware of these interdependencies which exist in an urban area when we design our policies. And a very important point, which I'd like to conclude, is the need to leave aside this dystopic future which dominates our consciousness and our awareness, and look towards an utopial future. A couple of questions for Yayo and Charo, for those among the public, amongst the audience here, and also those online. Who wishes to ask a question?
Si te quieres presentar brevemente, así.
Well, please introduce yourself and then ask your question. Thank you. I'm Mark from the BTUI. After having listened to you and having read the dossier, I was, well, the idea you had of a certain type of economy, how could we link up time with this new concept of rethinking the city of municipalities, taking into account the factors you mentioned? We'll have another question, and then we'll answer jointly. And thanks very much, Natalia Fidel from Buenos Aires. Fascinating. Your presentation was fascinating, and a lot of food for thought. You started as a presenter, you started talking of conflict between capital and life, and you've ended up talking of a cultural change which is on the horizon. And I thought what is very interesting is, do you have a strategy for this paradigm? Could be not only that you don't have time, you said hope and happiness, but there are also economic arguments could be marshaled. It's a good business it makes business sense, economic sense, within the strategy to change the paradigm. We should also look at it from the sort of monetary side of matters. Liana Parra from Bogota. And something you've touched upon, which I think is very interesting, is feeding the cities. And you mentioned the question of waste. In Latin American cities, particularly in Bogota, there's a whole question of the recycling population, but waste in Bogota in particular, and this happened in many cities in the country, there's no policy, if you like, to carry out a proper use of waste or proper recycling, and a lot of it ends up in landfills, not exactly environmentally sustainable. So then I have doubts. If I look at the environment, gender, and obviously time, we have been thinking how to work with the recycling population, especially recycling women who have to carry out recycling, with all the questions of non-remunerated care. And I haven't understood how we can have a clear conceptual framework which allows to make more deeper reflections. Because when you look at the environment, with ecofeminism, we managed to carry out that intersection, but it's not clear as yet when it comes to recycling, which is a highly economic issue today, very male-dominated, where I don't think much thought has been given. Just to allow me to develop all that question, this issue, because it's not clear as yet, at least from where we've been working, it's not clear how to carry out that intersection between waste management, environment, time, and gender. Because we, and you know, all that from the viewpoint of a recycling woman. Well, Yaya has mentioned the question of the donut economy. There are several world cities which are opening up to explore this economic model. And basically, if you have not yet seen it, it's like attempting to ensure that in economic policies, in municipalities, in this case, in any body, they should be between what the ecological ceiling, which you should not overshoot, everything which coincides with the extra. If you go beyond that, if you overshoot it, quality of life will be harmed, given scarcity of resources, and which is based on the report of the Stockholm University of the 9 planetary limits. I don't know if you're familiar with it. You can search it. They mention 9 limits which should not be overshot. They're there, the introduction of the report, the reference is there, and we have already overshot 6 of them, and they're all linked together. It's not just a climate claim and biodiversity, but the biochemical cycles of the planet, phosphorus and others, fresh water, need for plant, and all the chemical cocktail which surrounds us, including plastics. So we are in a situation where we've overshot many limits. And this is the ecological ceiling, which is mentioned by the donut economy, and a decent life. So we must not bear in mind the Chilean economist looks of human needs far more important than indicators linked to consumption rate. What do we need for a decent life given the economic and ecological parameters, given the ecological limits? I would like to add, in line of what you were pointing out, what is the relation with the donut and the question of time? Well, all this translimitation with the environmental cycle is a question of time, of speed, of extraction, of generating waste, of speed. Is this great acceleration, which I mentioned in the introduction. The ecological crisis basically is a clash a time clash between rhythms of natural cycles, which are slow and cyclical in human terms, and the times in which the globalized capitalist economy, it's important to say that, because it's not the only economy that exists in the world. There are many kinds of economy. The native peoples, domestic economy, or the farming communities economy. So the Reward view is perfect to deal with time policy. Would you have it a temporary conflict with the environmental ceiling and needs which must be catered for. So it's a good paradigm, and its virtuality, the virtuality of the donut economy, means that pedagogically it is very powerful. To date, ecological agendas have been completely divorced from social agendas. Each one follows its own track. And as some say, more than ever, it is necessary to deal jointly. How are people going to reach the end of the month, and how are we going to stop the end of the world? In the same framework, in the same project. So I think that is why we thought this is a pretty powerful paradigm. Now, what Natalia was saying is perhaps a bit controversial, I'm going to say, but the sustainability approach to life basically is an approach which states that it's necessary to set priorities of needs. Right now, we have economic models. Not all of them. There, social solidarity networks have to be highlighted and strengthened, but the big economy, the large-scale economy of the large companies, is an economic paradigm which has obviated responsibilities for a large enterprise, large company, large corporation. The key central objective is to increase its revenue, and what happens concerning people's needs, even of its own employees, doesn't really bother them. So I believe that we can move forward, looking at how all these questions which have to do with life sustainability and time use policy could be compatible with economic models such as the social solidarity economy, which are based on the satisfaction of needs. But I fear very much that we're going to have to understand that this kind of approach clashes directly with a way of understanding economy, which is at the origin of many issues we are facing. From my viewpoint, to bring together the discourse that, hey, this is a win-win situation for all is a bit of a lie, because if everybody wins, inevitably it means right now to put limits to certain excesses, to any excesses, in terms of capital gains or capital accumulation or the extractive approach. If we don't put a stop to them, will mean that the possibilities of a good life for a very significant portion of the planet, population of the planet, will be impossible. Will be pie in the sky. That's how I see it. I would also say that the solutions, false solutions, which come from these initiatives, which link up large companies, which will have profit rates, are solutions of green capitalism, and they're not good at the inception of the problems from the environmental area. They are end of the pipeline solutions, or which also have energy burden, and nothing which can be socialized can be is a privilege. And if eating meat every day right now is a privilege, I'm not saying it should be beating ourselves with a stick every day, but anything that cannot be universalized which cannot be universalized is a privilege. And don't think the solutions will come from the large corporations. I think we need solutions from public policies which bear in mind all these things. And then, later I do know some initiatives interesting initiatives which link up the social and solidarity economy with feminism and the work of women. And I think in recycling, there's a large field there. If you look at the history of women linked to home economy, the domestic economy, not because we are better, but because of patriarchy has compelled us to be there, is a tale which comes learning how to make things last, to make maximum use of them, which happens in farming communities and peasant communities. There are certain lessons learned over generations by women, which means that cooperativism, helping each other out, or making things last, or recycling and making maximum use of projects, are linked to the praxis and learning of many women. So I think that is something which links the rhythm of use of things and how to carry out a sort of urban mining, if you like, to reach resources where they are lacking, and that would be a source of employment which is significant, socially necessary employment of learning how to separate matters. There are many people working in what we call urban mining and considering waste as a project which I was delighted in Andalusia, which was set up by our colleagues, a project called Your Garbage is Worth an Egg, which is a play on words in Spain, in Spanish. And they set up a chicken farm outside the city. People would take their organic rubbish, which was fed to the chickens, of every so many kilograms of urban waste, of recyclable waste, of natural waste, and they could take eggs back home, chicken. Okay, Charlotte, thanks ever so much. A big round of applause for them. And now we shall, let's have the second block of the session, which I was talking about, with an intervention online at a technical level. I don't know whether everything is ready, but I would in any case invite for those who are on the technical team to put up on the screen our next speaker, who is Adrian Comanche. I don't know how to pronounce it, Adrian, but in any case, welcome. Sorry about the delay, and you have the floor. Now, hello, good morning. Thank you ever so much for inviting me. I'll get a presentation of an application called Mobiloscope. I shall start by sharing my screen. Mobiloscope is an online application. It's a project which is directed by Julie Vallée. And we do regret not being able to be in Barcelona with all of you today, but I'll carry out this online presentation, and I hope that it will be of interest to you. The field, the scope of which I will talk is more reduced than the one we have just listened to, but let's start. I shall talk of daily mobility. And when we talk of daily mobility, often we are interested in the links, this individual movements or the flows with origins and destinations. But there's a different way of looking at mobility, which has to do of presence. And it's a continued mobility as a temporary variability of presence. Here we have an example of this type of approach. What you can see are the French departments. Unfortunately, the screen is not being properly shared, and this is all the French departments and the cartographic approaches. Sorry, Adrian, we cannot see your presentation. Can you share your screen, because we cannot see anything? No, now that's better. Now that's better. Thank you. What I was saying is that our approach is to consider daily mobility not as a series of links of displacements or flows, but as a temporary variance of presence. And here, two examples. These are the French departments, like French provinces. Each, if you like, each department is shown on the map, larger or smaller, not in terms of geographical pure geography, but in terms of the size of the population. In November, we have a population present in each department, and not the resident population, the permanently resident population. And therein lies the interest of this. In November, there are no holidays. And so what we see is the normal distribution of the population which is resident there. In August, what happens? Everybody is fleeing the large metropolitan areas, and in particular Paris, and everyone is flowing to the coast. And you can clearly see that. In this study is a key difference between the present and this approach, which you can see. That we are talking of the population which is present, really present, and not sort of resident population according to census, if you like. If you look at the history of mobility studies and transport studies, this approach would seem to be rather original. But in fact, it is as old as the classical study of flows and displacement. Here's a map from an article written in the States. And what you see here is a map of the city of Detroit. I think it's Detroit. At 3 moments during the day, at 4 a.m., which is one on the left, at 3 p.m. and at 6 p.m. in the center and on the far right. And the reason is the same. The population, really present at 4 a.m., is more or less the same as the resident population. But at 3 p.m., it's different. You know, the center of the city is filled up, especially in a U.S. city, where it has its downtown business district, and then at 6 p.m., it starts emptying again until night time, when again the real population coincides with the resident population. If you look at this, you could say this is a new approach, but this has always existed. This approach is as old as the classical approach. So the what do we do with the mobiliscope? We used to look at the present population at each moment of the day, the municipalities of the cities which we analyze, and we can quantify the present population at every given time pursuant to its social profile, its activities, where they live, and its use of transport means, and also social profile. Another question is to quantify the levels of social segregation. We know many things on social segregation. There are many studies, much research has been done in anthropology and sociology, but all we know about social segregation is a segregation of residential areas, so where people actually live. And what we would like to know is this social segregation which exists within places of residence, how it evolves throughout the day. And this means, and this is the question of what is the effect of mobility on segregation. Is there a trend to mix social groups, or if it's segregated even more than in sort of residential segregation? These are the questions which are, if you like, are key for the mobiloscope app. Here are some examples of scientific questions which you can answer concerning segregation. We have to compare levels of social segregation during different times of the day in the same city, or compare cities between each other pursuant to the level of segregation. We could also analyze access to services. And for instance, in this map, which I showed you before, the map of the population present throughout 12 months of a year in France, the first body which was interested in this study and these maps was the Ministry of Health, because these maps go back to 2006, 2007. And at that time, the Ministry of Health wanted to know where they had to ensure that there were avian flu vaccine, and France bought 60 million vaccines, and vaccines have to be administered where people are, really, not where people supposedly live. So that's why the Ministry of Health was interested to ensure that they could place this vaccine where they were needed.
So the population that was there in these months and times of the day is very important regarding access to services. And it might be interesting too to build indicators. If we have a victimization or a crime indicator or any indicator, so we have to have a specific figure, but if we include the resident population, that's worth less. And Americans have been doing this for a long time because they have the central business districts that are crowded throughout the day, but they are empty at night because there are no residents. And all the indicators, well, depending on the city, but they basically build indicators that take into account the population that is there during the day. We're not doing very well time-wise, Hadrian. So is it possible to for you to be brief and shorten the presentation slightly? We do this with daily mobility surveys, which are surveys that allow us to know where do people go, with which means of transport, and we study not only the transportation needs, but also activities and presence. Let me briefly show you the interface of Mobiliscope. We have a version in Spanish. Here you can choose the city. We have about 20 French municipalities in Canada and South America. We include Bogota. And let me briefly show you an example about Paris. That was the first city in which we implemented it. Here we have the timeline. You can choose from 4 a.m. to 4 p.m. And here you can choose the social background, age, sex, or educational background, or income level. And here you see the time variation of the people present and also the social and demographic makeup of each district. And on the right-hand side, you have a series of indicators. For example, this one here is the response to the question about segregation. And here we have an indicator that says that the segregated population tends to be less mobile during the day than during the night. So urban mobility does not segregate further, but quite the opposite. So I'll leave it at that, but you have plenty of indicators and categories and social backgrounds, and about 30 cities in 3 continents. And if you access the presentation, you'll have the document, and this is open source, so you can access the code, the source code, and you can replicate it. And we also have, on the last slide, all the scientific quotes and bibliography that we have used for this topic. Thank you very much, Hadrian. Thank you very much, and apologies once again for the delay and the fact that I had to interrupt you. It's fundamental, the task that you do as Mobiliscope, to gather data and inform time policies. And as I said before, the third part of the session will be an exchange of best practices, and we will have Natalia Fiden. Please come up here, Natalia, councillor at the City Council of Buenos Aires, Diana Parra, in charge of care work and equality at the City Council of Bogota, Noemi Alfi from the City Council of Bolzano, and Mariona Cunil from the Metropolitan Area of Barcelona. Natalia, the floor is yours. You'll have to be brief and straight to the point. Sorry that I'm not friendlier. I think that we have a mic. Oh, no, the remote is here for your presentations. Well, you have the floor, Natalia. Okay. Okay, very quickly. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. The last reflection and discussion space before lunch. Let me transfer you to Buenos Aires to show you which is the unit of analysis. The city of Buenos Aires has 3 million inhabitants, and it doubles its population during the day. I don't know if there are many cities in the world that meet that criterion, and there are about 15 million people in Buenos Aires on a daily basis. So I'm here to talk about town planning and sustainable mobility, which is of a strategic nature in my context. I will not delve into each of these work streams, but back in 2016, we had a roadmap in place to try and plan the city of Buenos Aires by putting people at the center and prioritize policies connected to mobility and accessibility, and that goes hand in hand with a sustainable mobility plan. Because, of course, by having a sustainable mobility plan, you give back time to your citizens for them to use it at their leisure. And I have some examples here for you. I just want to show you that we worked on this sustainable mobility plan so that in rush hours in the metro of the city, there's only a delay, or you only have to wait for 3 minutes for the next metro. You know that there are many different groups in the city of Buenos Aires. We developed what we call the metro bus. These are bus lanes for buses, exclusively for buses. So we were able to take times down to 30 minutes instead of 40 minutes. And then the Paseo del Bajo, that allowed us to reduce the time spent by trucks that were crossing the city north to south, so they don't have to go through the city. And that meant a time reduction of 60 minutes, from 60 minutes to 7 minutes regarding heavyweight trucks. And of course, we promoted the use of environmentally friendly means of transport as bicycles. And today we have 500,000 bicycles cycling around the city with a 300 kilometers bicycle network, cycling lanes network. So apart from having a sustainable mobility plan, a city needs a decentralization of public services, because citizens not only need to be able to move around rapidly, but they need the possibility to access public services and do red tape close to their homes. And so the primary health centers, primary care centers, or other municipal venues that were scarce in the southern part of the city. So that's what we prioritized. We wanted to offer health and education services in the 15 districts of the city. And the last one is the care map that was the outcome of the Time survey. And there you see the whole offer of public services for childhood, people with disability, elderly people, and training courses for caregivers so that they can be certified as caregivers to try and fight against women's time poverty, as we've been mentioning once and again in this Congress. And then here we see the city of proximity, the 15-minute city. Between 2022 and 2023, the City Council plans included these 5 work streams that are from the SDGs by the UN, and the governance plans have a time dimension. I will not delve into the 5 of them, but we have 192 days of education up to having a 15-minute network, and that entails a whole cultural change, and cities can be empowered and start implementing the right to time close to the residents' homes. 2 more slides. This is a project that was implemented together with the development, the UNDP. And I just want to show you that we do not stick to the snapshot of 2016. That was the outcome of the Time survey. And after lunch, I'll be able to elaborate on it. But along that journey, we generated innovative projects like this one. This is a vulnerable district called Rodrigo Bueno in the city of Buenos Aires. And it's very similar to Mobiliscope. We conducted a social mapping of women. And we realized that 91% of the commuting were done by food, 50% had to do with care work, and so we did the social mapping of where these women went. We're talking about thousands of journeys because men usually commute from home to the workplace and back to the home, but women do it very differently. And then we conducted a survey, and not only we followed those women, but we asked them about their experience in that journey. What was the purpose? And we organized participatory workshops to devise specific measures to improve that journey. For example, we changed bus stops and the bus stop scheme, and also the safety of women, because they expressed the places where they felt unsafe, and also a policy to protect women from street harassment. And to wrap up, I showed it at the beginning, but as the councillor of the city of Buenos Aires, I'm here to convey a hopeful message. But it's not so sustainable, but it's valuable from a political standpoint. I told you that in 2020, the Time survey was included in our law, and that was unanimously passed. And I'm one of the authors of that law, and that was unanimously voted for because it makes sense. I think that we all agree that we need to promote co-responsibility in care work. And of course, we need to change the adoption license scheme, family license scheme we have managed. And what's interesting here is that it's politically beneficial if you want to promote time use policies in your cities. And it has to be thought out as an ecosystem, not as a one-off policy. No, we need to think about feeding and informing other policies that have to do with the care work map, gender policies, and all dimensions of health and sustainability that we have been discussing here in this forum. Thank you very much. Okay, so let's go to the other side of the pond and we will listen to Barcelona, Mariona Conill.
Això sortirà sol, què? El equipo técnico tiene preparado el cambio de... Vale. Muy bien.
Do we have Mariuna's presentation? Well, I have 5 minutes, so I'm here to tell you about 5 things. I'll go straight to the point and be as fast as possible. This is not one of the 5. It's just a bonus track. I'm here representing the Barcelona metropolitan area, specifically transportation, sustainability and mobility. And this is a map of Barcelona, of the metropolitan area. 636 square kilometers, about 3.2 million inhabitants. And as you can see on screen, it's a highly diverse territory. We have very dense cities and more scattered urban areas. We have green areas, forest and agricultural land. So the mobility, well, we have 36 municipalities, including Barcelona. So the mobility is very different depending on the area. When we talk about the 15-minute city and we take it to the metropolitan area, well, we're not talking about 15 minutes anymore, but 45 rather. If we analyze the data of the last survey about mobility in 2019, well, the average of the commuting that takes place in the metropolitan area lasts for 22 minutes. As you can see on this graph, there are people who go out for a walk for about 32 minutes on average, and then forced mobility to study or work, it's at an average of 26 minutes, but that's only an average. If we go to farther away municipalities from Barcelona, we would be talking about longer commuting. So if we compare these data with the ENEF survey in 2020, in the midst of the pandemic, we were shut down. In dark, we have 2020, and in light color, 2019. We see that all commutings go down, basically. And my third piece of information, we know that 83% of the commuting that start or end in Barcelona are shorter than 10 kilometers, which explains that we're not talking about very long times. Fourth idea, this 15-minute city notion is based on these values, and of course we cannot overlook them, so that our city is a city of proximity. We need to put people at the center and promote the values in red: environmentalism, proximity, solidarity, and participation. And as our colleague said before, we need to work on mobility, land use, diversity, and to promote our districts. People should not have to commute very long to meet their basic needs. And what do we do as the Barcelona metropolitan area to implement this? Well, governance is key for time use policies and to implement the 15-minute city. And something that we've done, and I'm referring here to my department, we approved the Urban Mobility Plan. Basically, we put together the urban mobility plans of the 35 municipalities, and we make 100 specific proposals for that mobility to be truly metropolitan in nature and stop navel gazing in each municipality. And the ultimate goal here is to improve people's quality of life. And of course, this is promoted by the 100 measures that are based on health, sustainability, efficiency, and equality. And the main objectives of these mobility, transportation and sustainability department at the Barcelona metropolitan area, I'll give you some examples. We want to improve the competitiveness of surface public transportation. We want to implement a metropolitan dimension in active mobility, so we can walk and cycle, and basically we can cross the city with those means of transport. We want to implement proximity principles throughout the city and to adjust the urban rationale that has a huge environmental impact on our territory. But we want an appeased city and a city of proximity. And very quickly, in terms of public transportation, we have strengthened the bus lanes, as we were told in the case of Buenos Aires. As for active mobility, we focus very much on expanding the infrastructure that has been planned since 2015, what we call Bicivia, which is the cycling lane network, about 500 kilometers for bicycles. So we increase that on a yearly basis and we improve signpostage. We want bicycle corridors. As for proximity, we have an accessibility plan to improve bus stops for them to be in pleasant spaces and to encourage people to take the bus. And we work hand in hand with the city councils to implement urban hubs or nodes for this last mile delivery. And that's my presentation. Thank you very much.
Pues bien, regresamos a...
Right, let's go back to Latin America to listen how from Bogota we're implementing this change with Diana Parra. Let's see, we got a new PowerPoint up. Right, well, I'll talk about our care system, which starts from the question, how are we reorganizing a city? First thing is to tell you that Bogota has 1,700 square kilometers. It has more than 7,900,000 people, with particular aspect of all this area, 7,000 square kilometers, only 35% is urban and 70% is rural. So that means it's a very dense city with important population where 52% are women and 48% are men. In the system of care, we have managed to have information, which didn't exist before, such as there's 52% of women who are basically 4 million odd women. 30% of them carry out non-remunerated care work with more than 10 hours a day, which is equivalent to 1.2 million of women in Bogota who exclusively work in care in a non-remunerated fashion, and 70% have only secondary level studies, 33% have no free time to carry out physical activities, relax or whatever, and 90% have low income, and 20% have chronic diseases which have been diagnosed.
En este sentido, entonces, con esta información lo que podemos hablar es de una pobreza.
What can we do with the information is time poverty exists in women in Bogota, and I say 30% of the population of the city are the ones in that kind of situation. There they have some figures. What is the care system? It's a network of services which articulates in a co-responsible fashion, and that's going to be a very important word, to provide time for women. We are this covers the private sector, Bogota. We're also looking at homes and the community, and we attempt to give them time to women so they can reach personal development, welfare, and generate income, and also political participation. Our care system is the 3 R's of the feminist economy to basically to redistribute, reduce, and reconsider. What are the services for women who work in care? There are new services that exist before, services such as education, income generation, and for people who need care, articulate social services which were pre-existent in the city, widening the timetable, and also bring them close to the person, to the beneficiaries. And another strategy which is aimed at homes and inviting that all dedicate to care. And what is a system of care? And this is where we have a time reduction by so-called care apples, home by home care, and the operational care units which did exist amongst. And this is what we know as a form of care, which seeks of all three things: to provide services in a simultaneous manner, care for people who do not have them, and for carers, especially women, as I was saying. Two, it brings these services closer to the citizens, and it provides them in such a way that is flexible. And we keep changing the logic of the state and the bureaucracy, which is sometimes a lot more rigid. What this allows us, this sort of apples of care, if you like, or care apples, are to consolidate services and to bring them close and to provide them in a far more proximate manner. In Bogota, distances well, those of you who know them, you can spend 2.5 hours in transport to go from one end of the city to the other. There is no subway. We're building them, but there are none as yet. And there's no subway, so that is why mobility is complex. Bogota is the Latin American capital of cycling. There's a very high use of cycles, but furthermore, this reorganization, which the city will have, which we are seeing and experiencing, yeah. Anyway, today we are seeing sort of these blocks, city blocks of care, and this allows us to bring services closer to areas of the city where we have which are socioeconomically depressed, and where people, to be able to have a service, a health service, had to spend an hour traveling, leaving the kid in the kindergarten and then moving on, and that it takes up a lot of time. What does this prototype of the blocks of care is to provide these, to reduce times, to bring service together, and to have space for alternative economies, circular routes, and this changes the logic of public transport in Bogotá, which is far more linear, and to provide community spaces, to provide care services, and to provide care to kids, and also to set up pedestrian precincts in these care blocks, if you like. What I was telling you were the care buses, because Bogota is, say, vast, it's huge, and it has so much rural area in the municipality. We have to take services to rural parts of the city, and distances are much wider. Like you go from, a person can spend 3 or 4 hours to travel around these rural areas, and these care buses take the same services there in the blocks to rural areas or areas which are devoid of them. And this home-to-home care will also, there are people who need high levels of care. They're very, very dependent. So the carer cannot cannot often leave their home, the home. And I conclude that the last thing is to say that Bogota has 12 care blocks. Here we're doing 75 square kilometers. We have to have 12 care blocks. There'll be one of them in these areas, and there are other areas which organize that. And where we'll have care buses, and the proposal in the land use planning bill will adopt them as a structuring element of the city of to leave 45 blocks. This is important because this plan is gender-based and
De la ciudad. Ustedes saben, Bogotá está a 2.600 metros con un páramo.
high and it's a city which is fortunate in terms of water supply because there's plenty of that. Water it comes down. It is a very high city, and Bogota would not be viable without that water supply. So the other thing is, the other axis is the system of cares, which allows us to begin to take care services in a far more closer fashion to people, so we can avoid all this displacement and move from having 20 to 45 care blocks, and that we'll talk of 45 blocks. Thank you all.
Y disculpas por
I apologize you're having to have this unpleasant role. Now let's go back to Europe, and we'll hand over to Noemi to give the experience of Bolzano.
So I know you are really hungry at the moment. You want to go to have lunch, so it will be a very short presentation, just 5 minutes, no more, I promise. So today I'm going to speak about cycling in the city of Bolzano. But disclaimer first, Bolzano is a very small city. It is not like Bogota, Buenos Aires, or Barcelona. We have just a little bit more than 100,000 inhabitants, and the city area is about 50 kilometers, 50 square kilometers. So the population density is 2,045 inhabitants per square kilometer. At the moment, we have a network of cycle paths of about a little bit less than 70 kilometers. Okay, so in 2002, when the new cycling mobility plan was presented, was submitted, the average of trips by bike was around 70%. And just last year, in 2021, the average increased to 26%. Our goal for the next years is to increase this percentage to 34%. Okay, so what we do to increase the use of bike in our city? So the municipality of Bolzano offers a bike sharing network with multiple bike sharing stations around the city. We offer in different moments of the year mobile bike repair shops. They are completely free for citizens. And we also offer, of course, multiple bike parking around the city that are safe to bike. And we also encourage the use of bikes by citizens with activities and events that I will explain to you. Okay. So we will focus about psychopaths and how they are linked to school. So as you can see here, we have in green and blue the network of the cycle paths, and the light blue circles are the school areas of the city. Not working? Okay. So to promote and to increase the use of bikes among kids, we have this event each year that is called Kids on Bikes. So children of elementary schools are invited to join this event with their own bikes. And they have to complete this route, and they receive a bike license at the end of the day. So this is a good opportunity for them to be sure that they are safe around the city when they use their bikes. And so this is the first steps for them to be introduced to this opportunity. Okay, then we organize each year another event that is called Bolzano by Bike. It is a day on which cars are not allowed to circulate, but only bicycles. So a lot of family joined this event to participate together, and there is also a lottery at the end of the day where they can win a bike. So it's also this one an event to promote the use of bikes again. Okay, so let's go back to students. In particular, we have to focus on high schools. So in 2018, we had this survey among high school students, and we asked them how they would rate the network of psychopaths in our city. So the overall rate was really good, actually, but we wanted to be sure that they could go safely to school. So we went on C2, and we made some changes. So after 2018 and between 2019 2020, we changed some streets for them. This is one example. So here we have this picture of a dangerous road junction for bicycles. As you can see, we have multiple streets for cars, and I will be really short. And yeah, so we did some changes. So this way it was more safe for them to go to school. This is just one example of what we did during the past years. Okay, so as we always like to say, small changes can lead to great results. So with a really, really small change, as you can see, we increased the use of bikes among high school students. So it was a great goal for us. Okay, so in the same survey, we also asked, what do you think of the cycling infrastructure? And as I said before, the overall assessment was really positive, but we did these changes to better the current situation. And the 12% of students said they only cycle to school, so it was great data for us. And if you think only about the students that live in the city of Bolzano and not in the surrounding area, the percentage rose to 23%. Bikes are mostly used when the schools are are near the city center. Unfortunately, we have a really good network, even for schools that are far from the city center, but students prefer to use other means of transport as cars, scooters, or public transportation. Okay, that was all.
Thank you very much. Bueno, lamentamos mucho.
Well, unfortunately, we had to rush it slightly, but we're doing very badly time-wise. We have tried to show the link between time use policies, sustainability, and the 15-minute city. And as we have seen, it can be implemented in 3 main work streams. Town planning, so the services and opportunities should be present across the city. Secondly, sustainable and active mobility. And finally, care work. And with that, we close this session. We'll be back at 2:30 for the next session. Thank you very much. See you later.